Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, a 14-year-old girl is shot for speaking her mind on a blog. The chilling impact of the gun on journalism in Pakistan.
Let's put it in terms of the average family.
Ever since 1960, the road to the White House has passed through a television studio. We look at the history of presidential debates. In Rupert Murdoch's world, if you're a celebrity who wants more rules to stop things like phone hacking, you're a scumbag. And the man who fell to earth. Our web video of the week. When news broke from Pakistan that a 14-year-old girl had been shot by members of the Taliban just for promoting female education on her blog, news organizations around the world jumped on the story. In Pakistan, however, they had to treat the subject with care. The Taliban warned local media to curb their reporting or deal with the consequences. This isn't just a story about one attack, it's a tale of how the journalistic environment in Pakistan has grown so dangerous. We've reported before on the perils of covering the country's intelligence services. Going on television to question blasphemy laws that affect freedom of speech can get you killed in Pakistan. Then there's the impunity factor. According to media watchdog groups, at least 20 journalists have been murdered since 2010, and not one of those cases has resulted in a conviction. Our starting point this week is Islamabad, where the usually polarized media agree on at least one thing, that in Pakistan it's been much too dangerous for far too long to be a journalist.
The job of a journalist, especially if you're doing a factual reporting, becomes increasingly difficult in a conflict environment.
The Taliban push out of Swat Valley.
It becomes doubly difficult in a politically diverse environment. It becomes triply difficult if you were to be reporting in a conflict environment which is also politically diverse and in which institutions are at loggerheads with each other. In Pakistan, you would get all these three, plus a very suspicious-minded public.
Having tried to silence one voice, that of Malala Yousafzai, who dared to speak about being banned from going to school, the Taliban have now threatened the media tracking that story. The news outlets under threat have been unusually unified in covering the original incident, an attack on a 14-year-old girl.
If we look at the coverage that this Malala incident has gotten, what has struck me the most is that this is perhaps the only instance that we have seen ever since this private media came into its own in Pakistan, where almost the entire media has spoken with one voice.
Opposition ne Malala ke waqt.
The Taliban have, they watch media very closely, by the way. So they may be sitting in mountains, but their tentacles are spread all across. Their information assessment sometimes is much better than the information assessment done by some of the biggest news channels in Pakistan. So they watch everything that gets said, they read everything that gets written, and they hear everything that gets spoken. So these threats are clear.
Things have become almost intolerable for journalists operating in Swat. The Taliban have issued a number of very bold threats against the media, naming specific media houses both in Pakistan and some international ones, including the BBC, saying that their reporters have been giving unbalanced coverage and threatening to kill journalists. I had a conversation with someone in Swat who told me that he had received a message from the Taliban spokesman saying that anyone seen carrying a camera in Swat as of a couple of days ago would be considered a target.
These kind of attacks basically send a signal to journalists that when they do their job, they shouldn't be informing the society, they should be doing the business of those who have power. And unfortunately in Pakistan, too often those who have power wield it through violence.
Pakistan's media landscape has spent the last 10 years in a state of constant change. The number of news channels has exploded, starting under the former military government of Pervez Musharraf and continuing under civilian governments since. And the threat is by no means limited to the Taliban or other armed groups. In May 2011, Salim Shahzad, a journalist for the Asia Times, was tortured and killed only weeks after saying he had been threatened by the ISI, Pakistan's intelligence service, over his reporting of al-Qaeda infiltrating the Pakistani military and attacking one of its bases. the military and intelligence services are two areas, two red lines that most Pakistani journalists fear to cross.
Let's not forget that it's a country that has been in a state of active conflict for one reason or the other for the last 30 years or more. Now, in that kind of an environment, the red lines for the media, they keep shifting. They're never static. Not only do these lines keep shifting, also the players drawing these red lines keep changing from time to time, which makes it really a very, very difficult environment for the media to operate on.
When 44 countries are in occupation of another country, when a war is erupting right under your strategic belly, to expect that country to stay normal and to expect the media to stay normal is expecting too much. Top that with the unending political tussle between the government and the opposition, and then between the government and the judiciary, then between the government and the army. So Pakistani media is in a state of crisis.
And they're working in a state of heightened fear. Last year, well before this latest specific threat from the Taliban, the Committee to Protect Journalists named Pakistan the most dangerous country in the world to be a reporter. There were 7 journalists killed in 2011 and not a single conviction in a court of law. As for the Taliban, there are Pakistanis who think the group is more than happy to deal with the negative publicity that has come from this story.
It's really important to remember that in recent times, the Pakistani Taliban has not had much coverage in Pakistan. It's been seen as a dying force. The attack on Malala has given them incredible coverage and really prominence for the first time in a long time. And they're really capitalizing on that by now spreading the threat to journalists. The Taliban, like other actors, when they want to influence coverage in the media, threaten the workers in the media.
Media houses here in Islamabad, both from the national and the international press, have been taking these threats quite seriously over the last number of days. A lot of the people I know are quite jittery. There are stories about Taliban plots against media houses. There are offices here that have temporarily closed. Some journalists have even moved into hotels in the city. They've left their homes. So that's really a measure of how seriously they're taking this. And I think we're entering to some degree uncharted waters in the relationship between the media and the Taliban and Pakistan.
Uncharted waters in a place that was already rough enough. Pakistan is a dangerous assignment that just got more dangerous. It's a dateline as deadly as any the world of journalism has to offer. Our Global Village Voice is now on the state of journalism in Pakistan.
The threats made by the Pakistani Taliban against media outlets in Pakistan are extremely serious in nature. For the first time, the Taliban are now believing that the media too is not taking their side in this heinous attack on Malala Yousafzai. And for this reason, they feel that they must issue these threats because they need to make sure that no one criticizes them, whether it's the civil society, politicians, people on the street, or even the media now.
The situation of free speech and media freedom in northwest Pakistan is quite grim. Firstly, you have surveillance of media outfits and journalists by government agencies, as well as militants. There are a lot of journalists who actually have agreements with the militants that they will not report too negatively against them, and they have to do that to safeguard their own lives. Secondly, the government has persecuted a lot of journalists who have spoken against them.
We're always looking for new faces for the program. If you'd like to share your thoughts on the news media as one of our Global Village Voices, you can connect with us on Facebook and Twitter, where we will let you know what stories we're working on. Or you can just get in touch with us via email at listeningpost@aljazeera.net. And don't forget our free video podcast on iTunes. Just look for the Listening Post, Al Jazeera English, and you'll find us there. Time now for Listening Post News Bites. The Speaker of the Tunisian Parliament has announced that the country's new constitution, which is still a work in progress, will not contain any clause that criminalizes blasphemy. Mustafa Ben Jafar's announcement has been welcomed by civil society and media groups within the country. Ennahda, the leader of the ruling three-party coalition, announced back in July that it wanted to criminalize blasphemy through the Constitution as well as the Penal Code. threatening jail sentences for anyone breaking the law. In announcing this reversal, Jafar said there is a fundamental achievement of the revolution that should never be called into question and that no one should be able to challenge, which is freedom of expression and of the press. The press freedom group Reporters Without Borders had lobbied against the blasphemy clause and was happy to see it dropped, but it remains concerned about the country's media having to operate in a legal void. We continue to be worried by the lack of a clear legal framework for the Tunisian media, one that respects international standards, the group said. Some new laws have been decreed. RSF says these laws provide a great deal of protection, but they have still not been put into effect, although they were promulgated more than 9 months ago. Spain's best-known and best-selling newspaper, El País, has announced that it is cutting its workforce by 1/3. The newspaper is owned by the Spanish media conglomerate Prisa, which blames declining advertising revenues. Prisa had its own debt problems and was forced to sell off a part of itself to a group of New York-based investors in 2010. The company now plans to fire 128 of the 464 staff members at the newspaper, get others to take early retirement, and exact a 15% pay cut from the remainder. Employees are planning protests in the form of work stoppages. New labor laws in Spain have made shedding workers much cheaper than it would have been 1 year ago. El País was established back in 1976, 6 months after the death of dictator Francisco Franco, and the paper has long been viewed as a prominent symbol of Spain's transition to democracy. Remember last year when Rupert Murdoch was so apologetic about the out-of-control phone hacking at one of his British newspapers?
This is the most humble day of my life.
His tone has changed. Murdoch's solemn apology to a parliamentary committee had to do with the hacking of crime victims, including a young girl who was murdered. This past week, a few celebrities, actor Hugh Grant among them, met with Prime Minister David Cameron to make sure that regulatory steps are taken to fix the problem with the press in the UK. After which, Murdoch tweeted, told UK's Cameron, receiving scumbag celebrities pushing for even more privacy laws. Trust the toffs. Transparency under attack, bad. That tweet brought a furious response from the celebrities involved. Murdoch eventually apologized, but only for the use of the term scumbag. He then downgraded the celebrities to just dodgy. The News Corporation chairman might be feeling a little bit stressed these days, with more and more calls coming from company shareholders for his removal. There's some good news for the Indian cartoonist Asim Trivedi. Charges of sedition brought against him by the Indian state of Maharashtra have been dropped. Trivedi, as reported here at the Listening Post, was arrested and jailed last month before being freed on bail following protests over his case, which relates to work published on Trivedi's website, Cartoons Against Corruption, during last year's anti-corruption protests. One of them depicted the Indian Parliament as a giant toilet bowl. The sedition law, initially used against Trivedi, is a relic of the Raj. It was put into place by the British in 1870 and was used against leaders of India's fight for independence, including Gandhi himself. After getting bailed out of jail, Trivedi traded one form of captivity for another. He's now a contestant on the Indian equivalent of the Big Brother reality show, Big Boss 6. 52 years ago, on September 26, 1960, John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon made television history when they stepped in front of the cameras for the first televised debate between two candidates trying to get to the White House. On that night, television changed the rules of the political game forever. Kennedy won the debate not so much because of what he said, but because of the way he looked when he said it. He went on to take the election. Since then, many a presidential campaign has come unglued in an instant, one single crystallizing moment during a debate. This is a format that values style over substance, and voters have punished politicians who have failed to understand that. With Barack Obama and Mitt Romney now set for their final debate on October 22nd, the Listening Post's Marcela Pizarro takes a look at a half-century's worth of television history, the media spectacle that is the televised debate.
President Obama and Governor Romney are preparing for the Super Bowl of politics.
Debate moments are important. Debate moments can change the race.
60 million Americans expected to watch.
This is a performance, and they're on stage in front of a lot of people. And not only do they need to be smart, but they need to act, they need to deliver it, they need to win, the Academy Award for debate presentation.
Any mistake that gets made is magnified and even sort of goes into the greatest hits reel for the future.
Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy.
The candidates need no introduction. When John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon came face to face for the first televised debate in history, the media initially declared Nixon the winner on the strength of his arguments.
Let's put it in terms of the average family.
But what registered with the public had nothing to do with substance and everything to do with style.
The lesson of that first debate is that image is very important, that the way Kennedy looked on camera, the way he presented himself, his calmness, his self-possession, all of that contrasted greatly with Nixon in a visual sense.
The public saw Nixon jittery, sweating, and they saw this really super cool surfer-looking guy in John Kennedy.
So that was all part of the learning curve of the early debates that now have become, really a standard. And it's not that voters are sitting at home saying which candidate has 5 o'clock shadow and which candidate doesn't, but it's which candidate looks relaxed and confident.
The history of American presidential debates on TV is a checklist of what not to do when you're standing in front of a camera broadcasting to millions of people.
Welcome, President Ford. Welcome, Governor Carter.
In 1976, right in the middle of the Cold War, the then President Gerald Ford was asked a question about Eastern Europe, which he proceeded to use as a one-way ticket out of the White House.
There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration.
I'm sorry, could I just follow? Did I understand you to say, sir?
He basically tried to make the point that the Soviets did not dominate Eastern Europe. It was a mistake, and it became a big problem for him politically because he was thought to have made, a real dumb error in the middle of that debate.
Ford is just one in a long list of presidential debate casualties.
The first question goes to Governor Dukakis.
In 1988, when longtime death penalty opponent Michael Dukakis was asked if he would change his position if his wife was raped and murdered, he learned the hard way that audiences need something more than just being consistent.
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty.
What Dukakis didn't get is that on TV, one simple line is sometimes all it takes.
An emphasis on
In the 1980 debate, when Jimmy Carter, the incumbent, began talking about Reagan's position on national health,
there you go again.
That quick quip was all the electorate needed.
They thought he was someone that people could relate to, who was self-deprecating and warm and friendly, and that put a softer side onto some of his policies.
After Reagan became president and had actually performed quite disastrously in his first debate against former Vice President Walter Mondale, he then came back at the second debate amidst lots of whispering that he was too old and baby Alzheimer's was setting in.
I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
And that kind of put the whole age issue to rest.
But then again, delivering lines came naturally to Reagan. After all, his first career had been as an actor.
Okay, Landon, let's talk.
Reagan was a great television, well, he was actually not a great television actor, he was a B-movie actor. And, but he knew how to perform and he understood the power of the camera.
Reagan was once asked, how can a former actor become president? And his response was, how can you be president and not be an actor? Because after all, you're on the world stage.
This idea of being a Hollywood actor and a president, in some ways there's some overlap in those two things.
American people look for content, they look for arguments, they're also looking for style. And I don't mean style in a superficial way, I mean style in terms of what do nonverbal cues and the candidate's demeanor and the candidate's personality tell you about who they're fighting for, what kind of person they are, what kind of leader they are.
Politicians have learned that nonverbal actions often speak louder than words. Body language can kill a candidate, even something as innocuous as a glance.
When George Bush's father, George H.W. Bush, looked at his watch during a debate, and that killed him because he says, when am I getting out of here? When am I done?
In the same debate in 1992, you have a very classic moment where Bill Clinton, in the town hall format, moves to the edge of the stage, talks directly to a woman in the audience who asks him about how the national debt and the bad economy had affected the candidates. And it's this kind of classic moment of a candidate bonding with a person in the audience in a very direct and very effective way.
In my state, when people lose their jobs, there's a good chance I'll know them by their names.
Effective for some, but not everyone. Bill Clinton had a natural ease. He understood stagecraft. His former Vice President, Al Gore, did not.
Gore actually left his podium and strolled over to Bush's side of the stage. He wanted to show that he could confront him, and Bush kind of glanced over like, you know, who are you? What is this?
And I believe I can.
Boy, people really decided that they didn't much like Al Gore.
And no matter how many media strategists on hand to choreograph every move, the first of this year's debates proved that when it comes to walking the TV tightrope, anything can happen.
I think this debate has clearly shaken up the presidential race. It's taken Romney from being someone whose party had virtually given up on him to now seeing him as a real contender. And you have President Obama, who seemed to be on a glide path to victory, now really having to fight.
I think it does show you that it's very easy, even for people who are practiced at being on television, even people in the highest realms of politics who do this all the time, they get into a debate format and there's something about the spontaneity of that moment that causes them in many instances to make mistakes, and these mistakes then come back to haunt them politically.
Because after 52 years, 13 elections, and all those debates, the candidates know that even the best campaign is no match for the unblinking eye of the camera and the power of television.
More Global Village Voices now on debates, politics, and the power of television.
Are the presidential debates more about style than substance? Absolutely. Because style is something that the average viewer can easily resonate with. Was a candidate overly aggressive? Was a candidate lethargic? Was a candidate smirking too much? The substantive points of the debate, the candidates go back and forth on factual statements, both saying that the other person is wrong or that someone the other candidate said is just not true. And that's hard for the average voter to relate to, but what they can relate to is the stylistic, human way that the candidates present the information.
I think in any democracy, presidential debates are really important, not from the point of view that one would expect, trying to persuade that undecided 4 or 5% to vote one way or the other. But the really important effect I think presidential debates have, and that is to actually promote the electoral process itself, because there's nothing worse in any democracy for there to be a low turnout to the polls.
Finally, the figures are in for the online media event that made Austrian daredevil Felix Baumgartner a household name. In the 4 minutes that it took Baumgartner to plummet to Earth from the edge of space, his stunt racked up 7.3 million hits on the YouTube live stream alone. More than 130 digital outlets streamed the jump, and at least 40 television networks in 50 countries carried the feed live. Moments after Baumgartner landed, half the worldwide trending topics on Twitter were related to the jump. You've probably seen video already, so we've come up with a bit of a mashup that mixes in Baumgartner's alter ego from the land of Lego. We found him in an advert for a toy fair that's coming up in Austria. We're leaving you now with our web video of the week, and we'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
If you're scared, walk away, 'cause there's no need to feel ashamed. Yeah, we all feel the same. Where's your passion? Where's your fighting?
Jumper away. Speed 725. Showing Felix in a stable descent.